I never thought I'd find myself smiling while being handed divorce papers. But as Daniel slid the manila envelope across our kitchen island, the one I'd paid for with my bonus last year, I felt an unexpected wave of relief wash over me. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," he said with that practiced, sympathetic tone he used with clients. The same tone he'd used when convincing me to co-sign for his massive business loan 3 years ago. The same tone he'd used last month when I discovered text messages from Olivia on his phone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What Daniel didn't know was that yesterday, I'd made the final payment on his $287,000 debt. What Daniel also didn't know was who exactly owned the company that had just acquired his struggling firm. The look on his face when he would discover both these things. That would be worth every penny of the millions I'd quietly built while he thought I was just getting by at my little tech job. I never planned on living a double life. Growing up in Portland with parents who valued honesty above all else, deception wasn't in my nature. My father always said, "Emma, the truth might hurt, but secrets will destroy you." The irony of how things unfolded isn't lost on me. Daniel and I met 8 years ago at a tech conference downtown. I was presenting research on emerging financial software applications, not exactly the kind of topic that usually attracts attention from handsome marketing executives. Yet, there he was, asking insightful questions after my presentation, complimenting my analysis with what seemed like genuine interest. He was charming, attentive, and seemed impressed by my mind rather than just my appearance. After 2 coffee dates and a dinner, I was smitten. Daniel represented everything I thought I wanted: ambitious, well-spoken, and seemingly supportive of my career aspirations. "We'll build something amazing together," he promised during our honeymoon in Cozumel, tracing plans in the sand as waves washed over our feet. For the first 3 years of our marriage, that promise seemed real. We bought a modest house in the suburbs, split expenses evenly, and supported each other's career moves. I was rising through the ranks at TechSphere Solutions, while Daniel jumped between marketing positions, always chasing something bigger, always convinced his big break was just around the corner. The shift was so gradual I barely noticed it. Comments about my safe career choices, suggestions that I was wasting my potential at a company that didn't appreciate me, small criticisms about my clothes, my friends, my hobbies. By our 4th anniversary, Daniel had convinced me that his newest venture, a boutique marketing firm targeting luxury real estate developers, was our ticket to the life we deserved. "It's a guaranteed success, Em," he said, spreading elaborate business plans across our dining room table. "I just need startup capital. The bank needs a co-signer because of that investment mishap last year. It's just a formality." I remember the weight of the pen in my hand as I signed those loan documents. $250,000 of debt with my name attached. My financial advisor, Robert, had warned me against it, but Daniel had a way of making my concerns seem like a lack of faith in him. "Don't you believe in us?" he'd asked, his voice tinged with just enough hurt to make me feel guilty. What I didn't tell Daniel was that I'd already been offered a promotion at TechSphere. Not just any promotion, but a position on the executive track with stock options that my financial advisor called potentially life-changing. The night before signing Daniel's loan papers, I accepted the offer via email, asking HR to keep the news quiet until the formal announcement. I told myself I was being prudent, creating a safety net for our future. I didn't recognize it then as the first thread of distrust in our marriage. The first year of Daniel's business venture looked promising on the surface. Glossy business cards, a sleek downtown office, client meetings at expensive restaurants. But at night, when he thought I was sleeping, I'd find him hunched over his laptop, the glow illuminating the worry lines deepening across his forehead. Our joint account was hemorrhaging money, and my salary was increasingly covering our household expenses. "It's just growing pains," he assured me when I carefully broached the subject. "All startups struggle at first. This is normal." What wasn't normal was discovering the credit card statements he'd been hiding. An $8,000 weekend in Vegas when he told me he was at a marketing conference, designer clothes, expensive dinners, for clients whose names never appeared in any of his business materials. The night I found those statements, I also found a text from someone named Olivia. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait until she's out of town again." The timestamp matched a weekend when I'd visited my sister Jessica in Seattle. Something broke inside me that night. Not just my heart, but something more fundamental, my willingness to maintain the facade of our partnership. As Daniel slept, I made two decisions that would alter the course of both our lives. I would protect myself financially, and I would never let him see me hurt again. The next morning, I called Robert and scheduled an urgent meeting. Over coffee at a small cafe far from Daniel's usual haunts, I laid everything out: the hidden debt, my suspicions of infidelity, and my growing equity position at TechSphere. "You need to separate your finances immediately," Robert advised, his normally friendly face serious. "And you need to decide what you want the end game to be here." The end game. Such a clinical term for the death of a marriage. But as I sipped my cooling coffee, I realized I wasn't ready to walk away. Not while Daniel's debt had my name attached to it, not while leaving meant admitting defeat. "I want to protect myself while I figure things out," I told Robert. "And I want to make sure that when I do make a move, I'm doing it from a position of strength." Robert helped me create a financial strategy that would become my secret armor. I opened separate accounts under my maiden name. I redirected my bonuses and stock dividends to these accounts. I lived on a fraction of my increasingly substantial income, maintaining the appearance of the same mid-level tech employee Daniel had always underestimated. At work, I threw myself into projects that showcased my abilities. Each presentation, each successful client integration, each innovative solution I developed pushed me higher within the company. By our 6th anniversary, which Daniel forgot, absorbed in some crisis at his struggling firm, I was managing an entire division and reporting directly to the CEO. Lisa, my best friend since college and now TechSphere's legal counsel, was the only person besides Robert who knew the full extent of my situation. "You're living like a secret millionaire," she observed over lunch one day, watching me clip a discount coupon for the grocery store, "while he thinks you're barely keeping your head above water." "It's not about the money," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about having options when I finally decide what to do." Those options expanded dramatically when TechSphere's CEO called me into his office on a rainy Tuesday morning. "We're looking to acquire smaller firms with complementary services," he explained. "We need someone to head up the evaluation team, someone with financial acumen and vision." The team I assembled spent 6 months evaluating potential acquisitions. When Daniel's firm appeared on our list of struggling companies with valuable client lists, I recused myself from the direct assessment, but kept tabs on the findings. His company was drowning in debt, surviving month to month on increasingly desperate lines of credit. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Daniel thought I was stretched thin covering our household expenses, I was part of the team that could potentially determine his professional fate. The acquisition offer, when it came, was far more generous than his company's finances warranted. I made sure of that, working behind the scenes to emphasize the value of his client relationships rather than his disastrous balance sheet. I told myself it was ethical. I wasn't inflating the value, just ensuring the human elements weren't overlooked. When Daniel came home elated about a lifeline offer from a major tech company, I congratulated him with genuine warmth. "That's amazing news," I said, pouring him the expensive scotch he preferred, scotch I paid for but pretended was a splurge. They're paying off all our business debt as part of the deal, he explained, eyes bright with relief. All of it, Em. We're finally free. He didn't say, I'm sorry for risking our financial security, or thank you for carrying us while I chase this dream. Just, we're finally free. That night, as Daniel celebrated with his friend Mark at an upscale bar downtown, I logged into our loan accounts. The acquisition deal wouldn't close for another 2 months. The debt was still very much active, still very much attached to my name. I made a decision that would later prove fateful. I transferred $287,000, the full remaining balance of the business loans and credit lines, from my private accounts. I paid everything off, every last cent of the debt that had hung over my life for years. I didn't do it for Daniel. I did it for me. To close that chapter completely, on my terms. After the transfer was complete, I felt strangely hollow. This secret war I'd been fighting, accumulating resources, protecting myself financially while maintaining the appearance of dependence, had consumed so much of my energy for years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With the debt gone, I was forced to confront the empty core of my marriage. The next few weeks passed in a strange limbo. Daniel was busy with acquisition paperwork, frequently working late. I knew some of those late nights were spent with Olivia. His location sharing occasionally placed him at her address in the Pearl District, but I couldn't summon the anger I once felt. Something more like pity had taken its place. The acquisition was finalized on a Thursday. By Friday evening, Daniel had placed a manila envelope on our kitchen island while I prepared dinner. I think we both know this isn't working anymore, he said, not meeting my eyes. Inside the envelope was a divorce settlement that could only be described as insulting. He would keep the house, which my down payment had secured. He would keep his newly debt-free business proceeds. I would receive a generous monthly alimony that was about 1/10 of my actual monthly income. My lawyer says this is more than fair, Daniel added. Considering I'll be the primary earner moving forward, the acquisition payment will set me up nicely and, well, you've always been comfortable with your steady but modest situation. I felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside me. For years, I'd maintained this fiction, the supportive wife with a reliable but unexceptional career. I'd driven my 6-year-old Honda while stock options worth millions accumulated in my private accounts. I'd clipped coupons while paying off hundreds of thousands in his debt, all to protect myself, to ensure that when this moment came, and I'd always known it would, I would be ready. I'll need some time to look this over, I said mildly, tucking the papers back into the envelope. And I think we should meet with both our lawyers present before anything is finalized. Daniel looked relieved. He'd expected tears, perhaps even begging. My calm acceptance clearly unsettled him, but not enough to make him reconsider. He was already mentally spending his acquisition payout, already planning his future with Olivia, or whoever would come after her. Take the weekend, he said magnanimously. But I've got meetings with financial advisors on Monday to start investing the acquisition money, so it would be good to have this squared away. I nodded, already, composing emails in my head. One to Lisa, requesting an emergency meeting with her and our corporate legal team. One to Robert, asking him to prepare comprehensive financial statements. And one to Jessica, my sister, who had offered her guest room as a sanctuary whenever I was ready to make my move. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in years. The weight of secrets is exhausting, but sometimes their protection is necessary. By the time light filtered through our bedroom curtains I'd selected and paid for while Daniel complimented my bargain hunting skills, I knew exactly how the next phase would unfold. Saturday morning, I suggested we meet for coffee at River Place, a quiet cafe overlooking the Willamette River. To discuss logistics, I explained while Daniel scrolled through his phone, barely listening. I think it's better to talk through these things in a neutral setting." He agreed absently, clearly expecting another easy victory over the wife he'd always underestimated. What he didn't expect was that I'd arranged for Lisa to join us, along with Robert. What he certainly didn't expect was the thick folder of documents I placed on the table after our lattes arrived. "Before we proceed with any divorce settlement," I began, my voice steady, "I think we need to clarify our actual financial positions." Daniel's confident smile faltered. "I don't see why your friend from work needs to be here for this," he said, nodding toward Lisa. "Lisa isn't just my friend," I explained. "She's TechSphere's chief legal counsel. And TechSphere, as you now know, is the company that acquired your marketing firm. I could see him processing this information, trying to find the angle. That's quite a coincidence," he finally managed. "Not really," I continued, opening the folder. "TechSphere has been my employer for 8 years. What you didn't know is that for the past 4 years, I've been on the executive team. Executive Vice President of Strategic Integration, to be precise." I slid a company organizational chart across the table. There was my name, 3 levels from the top, with a direct line to the CEO. Daniel stared at it, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first flickers of alarm. "That's not possible," he said. "You never said anything about promotions like that. Your salary has always been—" "The salary I reported to you," I interrupted gently, "was a fraction of my actual compensation. My base salary last year was $275,000. With bonuses and stock options, my total compensation was just over $2 million. The color drained from Daniel's face. Robert chose this moment to slide another document across the table, a statement of my personal net worth. Daniel's eyes widened as he took in the numbers. "But the house payments, the bills. You always said we were just getting by," he stammered. "We were just getting by because your business was losing money and you were hiding spending," I corrected him. "I paid our mortgage, our bills, and covered the minimums on your business credit cards from what I allowed to flow into our joint account." Lisa produced another document. "This is the acquisition agreement for your company," she explained professionally. "You'll notice on page 4, the acquiring entity is listed as Horizon Ventures." "Horizon Ventures is my holding company," I added quietly. "I established it 3 years ago as a vehicle for personal investments. So technically, Daniel, I now own what remains of your marketing firm." He stared at me as though seeing a stranger. In many ways, he was. The Emma he thought he knew. The supportive, financially dependent wife who would gratefully accept whatever divorce terms he offered, had never really existed. "But the business loans," he said, grasping for some foothold in this shifting reality. "The acquisition was supposed to pay those off." "The loans were paid in full 2 months ago," Robert interjected, sliding a final statement across the table. "By Ms. Wilson personally, from her private accounts." Daniel's hands actually trembled as he examined the loan payoff documentation. You paid $287,000 of business debt before the acquisition? Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted to close that chapter of my life on my terms," I answered truthfully. "Those loans had my name on them too, remember? I wasn't going to leave my financial fate in anyone else's hands any longer." The implication hung between us. I had paid off his massive debt the day before the acquisition, an acquisition by my own holding company. And the day before, he served me with divorce papers. "So the generous acquisition offer," Daniel began, "was fair market value for your client list and intellectual property," Lisa confirmed. Emma recused herself from direct valuation to avoid any conflict of interest. "But yes, without those loans on the books, the purchase price appeared much more generous than it might have otherwise." Daniel slumped back in his chair, the coffee before him growing cold. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice hollow. I closed the folder and looked him directly in the eyes. Now we negotiate a divorce settlement based on our actual financial positions and contributions. I think you'll find the terms I'm about to propose considerably more equitable than what your lawyer suggested. The terms were simple. I would keep my TechSphere position, stock options, and personal investments. Daniel would retain the acquisition payment, which was substantial enough to restart his life comfortably. We would sell the house and split the proceeds proportionally based on our contributions to its purchase and maintenance. I would not seek any ongoing payments from him, nor would he receive any from me. And Daniel, I added, as he stared blankly, at my counter-proposal. I've kept documentation of your expenses with Olivia and others over the past 2 years. I'm not interested in using that information as leverage, but I'd appreciate an uncontested, discreet divorce. The mention of Olivia, the confirmation that I'd known about her all along, seemed to deflate him entirely. You've known everything, he said quietly. All this time. Not everything, I corrected him, but enough. As Daniel sat shell-shocked across from me, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, just relief. The double life I'd been living, protecting myself while maintaining a fiction of financial dependence, had been exhausting. Whatever came next would at least be authentic. One last thing, I said, reaching into my purse. I placed a small velvet box on the table, the one that had contained the platinum wedding band he'd given me on our wedding day. I'd like to return this, not out of anger, but because I think we both need a clean break. Daniel stared at the box, then back at me. I don't understand how you did it, he finally said. How did you become this person? Without me knowing? The question revealed so much about how little he'd ever really seen me. I was always this person, I replied simply. You just never took the time to look. As I stood to leave, Robert and Lisa gathered the documents while Daniel remained seated, still processing the complete inversion of the power dynamic he had taken for granted for years. I'll have my lawyer contact yours on Monday, I said. I hope we can make this transition as painless as possible for both of us. Walking away from that table was the first truly honest moment I'd had in years. The weight of pretense, of carefully maintained deception, lifted with each step. By the time I reached my car, the modest Honda I'd chosen to maintain my cover, I felt lighter than I had since before I met Daniel. That evening, as I packed essentials for my temporary stay at Jessica's, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. I signed the counter-proposal. You'll have it Monday. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some endings don't require further dialogue. Some apologies come too late to matter. The divorce was finalized 3 months later with minimal drama. Daniel moved to Chicago to restart his career away from the whispers that inevitably followed the collapse of our marriage. I purchased a loft downtown, closer to TechSphere's headquarters, and finally allowed myself to live openly in alignment with my professional success. 6 months after our coffee shop meeting, I was appointed Chief Strategy Officer at TechSphere, a position that came with a seat on the board of directors. The announcement made the business section of the Portland Tribune. Jessica texted me a screenshot of the article with a simple message. He definitely knows now. But by then, Daniel's knowledge or opinion had ceased to matter. The woman who had hidden her success to protect herself from a husband's financial recklessness no longer existed. The woman who signed the executive appointment acceptance letter was simply me, Emma Wilson, no longer defined by secrets or strategies or survival. Sometimes I think about what my father would say about the double life I led during those final years of my marriage. The truth might hurt, but secrets will destroy you, he always warned. He wasn't entirely wrong. The secrets had taken their toll, requiring constant vigilance, careful planning, and emotional isolation. But what my father never mentioned was that sometimes secrets can also save you. They can be a shelter while you build your strength. a cocoon while you transform into someone who no longer needs their protection. I have no regrets about paying off Daniel's debt before he served me with divorce papers. That final financial act, wiping away the obligation that had hung over both our names, wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming power over my own life, on my own terms. The look on his face when he realized who I truly was, what I had accomplished while he underestimated me, and how completely he had misjudged our positions, that was something no amount of money could buy. That was the moment I became fully visible, not just to him, but to myself. The day I discovered the truth about Daniel's business was the day I started building my escape plan. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I'd come home early with a migraine. Our house was silent. Daniel was supposed to be at a client meeting across town. I'd gone to our home office to find my migraine medication when I noticed his laptop open on the desk. I wasn't looking for trouble. I had never been the type to snoop through his things, always believing that trust was the foundation of our relationship. But the spreadsheet glowing on his screen was impossible to ignore. Columns of red numbers, loan amounts with interest rates that made my stomach turn, and payment schedules that stretched years into the future. Beside the laptop lay a stack of unopened envelopes from our bank, from credit card companies, from lenders I'd never heard of. With shaking hands, I opened the first envelope. A missed payment notice. Then another. And another. The final envelope contained a letter threatening legal action if the payment wasn't received within 30 days. My migraine intensified as the reality of our financial situation became clear. Daniel's marketing firm, the business venture he had convinced me would secure our future, was hemorrhaging money. The $250,000 loan I had co-signed was just the beginning. He had opened multiple credit lines, taken cash advances, even borrowed, against our home equity without telling me. I remember sinking into his office chair, my world spinning. The carefully constructed life we'd built together was a house of cards, and I was only now seeing how precarious our foundation had become. Daniel wasn't just struggling. He was drowning us both in debt while maintaining a facade of success. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Closing deal with Watson account. Might be late. Don't wait up." The timestamp on his most recent loan application was that morning. There was no Watson account. I'd seen enough of his client list to know that. Another lie to add to the growing pile. I should have confronted him that night. A healthier version of me would have demanded answers, would have insisted on transparency and a plan to fix this disaster together. Instead, I methodically replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, swallowed my migraine pill, and went to bed early. When Daniel came home smelling of expensive scotch and wearing the smile he reserved for successful days, I pretended to be asleep. That night marked the beginning of my silent preparation. The next morning, I called Lisa, my best friend since college, and now the legal counsel at my company. "I need to protect myself," I told her over coffee at a cafe far from our usual spots. "And I need to do it without Daniel knowing." Lisa's expression had grown increasingly grave as I laid out what I'd discovered. "This isn't just financial infidelity, Emma," she said finally. "This is a systematic betrayal of trust. You realize that, right?" I did, but hearing it stated so plainly sent a fresh wave of pain through me. "I still love him," I whispered, surprised to find it was still true despite everything. "I want to believe there's an explanation." "Then ask him for one," Lisa countered, her tone gentle but firm. "But protect yourself first. Love doesn't pay creditors when they come calling." With Lisa's help, I began constructing a financial safety net separate from Daniel. My first step was opening a private bank account under my maiden name. Next, I met with Robert, a financial advisor Lisa recommended, who helped me redirect a portion of my salary into this new account. "Your name is on these loans," Robert warned me after reviewing the documents I'd managed to gather. "If he defaults, they'll come after both of you. You understand that, right?" I understood all too well. Daniel's financial decisions had placed Both our futures at risk, and whether I stayed or left, I needed to prepare for the worst-case scenario. The promotion at TechSphere couldn't have come at a more crucial time. I'd been working toward this advancement for years, putting in extra hours, taking on challenging projects, consistently exceeding expectations. When my boss called me into his office and offered me a position on the executive team with a substantial salary increase and stock options, it felt like the universe offering me a lifeline. "You deserve this, Emma," he said, sliding the offer letter across his desk. "Your work on the Richards project alone saved us millions. The board unanimously approved your promotion." I signed the papers immediately, but made an unusual request. "I'd appreciate if this could be kept relatively quiet for now," I said. "I'm dealing with some personal matters, and I'd prefer to transition into the role without much fanfare." My boss raised an eyebrow but agreed. That small act of discretion would prove invaluable in the months ahead. At home, I told Daniel I'd received a modest raise, enough to explain my ability to cover more of our household expenses, but not enough to hint at my actual new position. He congratulated me absently, more concerned with his own business challenges than my career milestones. "That's great, babe," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "Listen, I might need to tap into our savings this month. Just a temporary cash flow issue with the Miller project. Our savings account, which had once held a healthy emergency fund, was already nearly depleted from previous temporary withdrawals." I nodded noncommittally, knowing there was little left for him to tap into, and what remained, I had already planned to move into my private account the next day. "Maybe I can help," I offered carefully. "I've learned a lot about financial management. At work, I could take a look at your business accounts, see if there are ways to optimize your cash flow." The flash of panic in Daniel's eyes was brief but unmistakable. "That's not necessary," he said quickly. "My accountant has it under control. Just normal growing pains for a business this size." His dismissal stung, but it wasn't surprising. Throughout our marriage, Daniel had consistently underestimated my financial acumen, preferring to see me as supportive but naive about real business. This perception, which had once merely annoyed me, now served as perfect cover for my growing financial independence. The next phase of my plan began when I received my first executive bonus, a sum larger than what Daniel thought I earned in an entire year. Robert helped me invest it strategically, creating a diverse portfolio that would grow quietly while I decided what to do about my marriage. "You're building quite a nest egg," Robert observed during one of our monthly meetings. "Do you have a timeline for when you might need to access these funds?" I didn't, not yet. Part of me still hoped for reconciliation, that Daniel would come clean about the financial mess, that we could work together to fix it, that the partnership we'd once had could be salvaged. Another part of me was preparing for war. The dual life I was leading took its toll. At work, I was thriving, confidently leading my team, making strategic decisions that impacted the entire company, earning the respect of colleagues and executives alike. At home, I maintained the persona of the supportive wife, pretending not to notice when bills went unpaid or when Daniel came home later and later, often with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. I found myself developing strategies to uncover more information about our true financial state without alerting Daniel to my investigation. I created a fake email account that looked similar to his accountant's and sent him a message requesting confirmation of the updated loan terms. His reply, clearly assuming he was writing to his accountant, revealed 3 additional loans I hadn't known about. Each discovery was like a knife twisting deeper. It wasn't just the money, it was the elaborate deception, the calculated choice to keep me in the dark while putting my financial future at risk. The man I'd married, the partner I'd trusted implicitly, had been systematically undermining our security while maintaining a facade of success. 6 months into my silent preparation, Daniel's firm landed a significant client, a luxury real estate developer looking to rebrand their properties across the Pacific Northwest. It was the kind of account Daniel had been chasing for years, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the ambitious, optimistic man I'd fallen in love with. "This changes everything, Em," he announced, popping an expensive champagne bottle I knew we couldn't afford. "Watson Developments is exactly the kind of client we need to put us on the map. Their retainer alone will cover our operational costs for the next year." I wanted to believe him. Part of me even dared to hope this might be the turning point, that, with a stable client, Daniel might finally address the financial hole he dug for us. I raised my glass and smiled, ignoring the doubt gnawing at my insides. That hope was short-lived. 3 weeks later, I overheard Daniel on the phone in his home office, his voice strained as he tried to soothe an obviously angry client. "Mr. Watson, I understand your concerns, but I assure you the delay is temporary. My creative team is perfecting the concept to ensure it exceeds your expectations." The truth, which I uncovered through careful observation and strategic questions to mutual friends in the industry, was that Daniel had underbid the project to secure the contract, then found himself unable to deliver what he'd promised with the resources he had. Rather than admit the miscalculation, he was borrowing more money to hire freelancers, digging himself deeper into debt while trying to keep Watson Developments from walking away. It was a pattern I'd seen him repeat countless times, overpromising, under-delivering, then scrambling to bridge the gap with borrowed money and elaborate excuses. The difference now was that I could see the pattern clearly without the blinders of trust and admiration I'd worn for so long. Around this time, TechSphere began exploring acquisition opportunities as part of our growth strategy. As a member of the executive team, I was involved in evaluating potential targets, smaller companies with complementary technologies or client bases that could be integrated into our ecosystem. During one strategy meeting, our CEO mentioned wanting to expand our service offerings to include more specialized marketing capabilities. "Our enterprise clients are asking for integrated solutions," he explained. "They want one vendor handling both their technical needs and their market positioning. If we could acquire a boutique marketing firm with experience in our sector, it would give us a competitive edge." My heart rate accelerated as an idea formed, one so audacious I almost dismissed it immediately. Could TechSphere potentially acquire Daniel's firm? The irony would be almost poetic, the company he'd dismissed as my safe career choice becoming the savior of his failing business. I said nothing during the meeting, but afterward, I approached our acquisitions team with careful questions about what kinds of marketing firms might fit our criteria. Without mentioning my connection, I gathered enough information to confirm that Daniel's company, despite its financial troubles, might indeed be of interest due to its client relationships and specialized focus on high-end real estate and luxury brands. The moral complexity of what I was considering weighed heavily on me. Would facilitating an acquisition of my husband's company represent a conflict of interest? Would it be an act of salvation or revenge? I scheduled a confidential meeting with Lisa to discuss the ethical implications. "You need to disclose your relationship to the company," Lisa advised immediately. "But recusing yourself from direct valuation or negotiation would address most of the conflict concerns. The bigger question is what you're trying to accomplish here." It was a question I'd been asking myself for days. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to help him, to solve the problem he's created without him having to know I was the solution. Another part wants him to discover just how capable you really are," Lisa finished for me. "Just how wrong he's been to underestimate you all these years." She wasn't wrong. The fantasy of Daniel realizing that his professional salvation came through the wife whose career he'd consistently diminished held a powerful appeal. But there was more to it than simple vindication. "His business is going to fail if something doesn't change," I said quietly. "And when it does, those loans will come due. My name is on enough of them to ruin me too. Lisa nodded, understanding the practical considerations behind my thinking. Then disclose the relationship, recuse yourself appropriately, and let the acquisition team make their determination based on the business merits. If it makes sense for TechSphere, it's not your fault or your triumph that your husband's company qualifies. That evening, I drafted a formal disclosure document outlining my relationship to Wilson Marketing Group and submitted it to our compliance department and CEO. As expected, I was removed from direct involvement in any potential evaluation of Daniel's firm, but was assured that if the business case was strong, my personal connection wouldn't disqualify the company from consideration. What I didn't expect was how quickly things would move after that. TechSphere's acquisition team, operating independently of my input, identified Daniel's firm as a potential target within weeks. Their initial assessment noted the company's impressive client list and specialized expertise, while flagging concerns about its financial stability. Concerns that would typically reduce the acquisition price, but wouldn't necessarily eliminate it from consideration. I maintained my distance from the process, focusing on my other responsibilities while receiving only the most basic updates that would be shared with any executive not directly involved. It was strange watching from the periphery as my professional world and personal world moved toward a collision neither had anticipated. The first direct contact between TechSphere and Wilson Marketing came 6 weeks later. Daniel mentioned it casually over dinner, his tone a careful mixture of nonchalance and pride that I'd grown to recognize as his way of signaling a potential win. "A tech company reached out today," he said, twirling pasta onto his fork. "They're interested in possibly acquiring us. Probably nothing will come of it, but it's flattering to be on their radar." "That's interesting," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "Which company?" "TechSphere Solutions," he said, watching for my reaction. "Your company, actually. Isn't that a coincidence?" I forced a look of surprise. "Really?" "That is a coincidence. I hadn't heard anything about it." The lie came easier than it should have, but after months of living a double life, I'd become adept at compartmentalizing truth. "Would you have any insight into why they might be interested?" Daniel asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "I mean, we're not exactly in the same sector." "They've been talking about diversifying our service offerings," I said truthfully. "But I'm not involved in acquisitions, so I don't know the specifics of what they're looking for." Daniel seemed satisfied with this explanation, his momentary suspicion giving way to excitement about the potential opportunity. Their initial outreach was encouraging. If this goes somewhere, it could be exactly what we need to take things to the next level. I nodded encouragingly, familiar with his pattern of latching onto potential external salvation rather than addressing the fundamental issues in his business model. Still, in this case, his optimism wasn't entirely misplaced. TechSphere could indeed provide a soft landing for his struggling company, if the deal went through. Over the next month, I watched from a carefully maintained distance as the acquisition process advanced. Daniel became increasingly energized, spending long hours preparing for meetings with TechSphere's team, assembling presentations that highlighted his company's strengths, while carefully obscuring its financial weaknesses. "They seem really interested," he reported after one particularly promising meeting. "Their due diligence team asked all the right questions. I think they see the potential in what we've built." What Daniel didn't know, what TechSphere's thorough due diligence would eventually uncover, was the extent of his company's debt. The loans, the credit lines, the missed payments, the tax issues, all of it would come to light during the financial review phase of the acquisition process. That reckoning came sooner than I expected. Daniel came home one evening, ashen-faced, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. He poured himself a double scotch before acknowledging my presence in the living room. "They found the loans," he said finally, his voice hollow. "All of them." The TechSphere financial team wants a complete accounting of our liabilities before proceeding with any offer. I set aside my book, giving him my full attention. Is that a problem? I asked, though I knew the answer. Daniel laughed bitterly. A problem? Emma, they're going to run for the hills when they see the complete picture. No company wants to acquire this level of debt. Maybe they'll adjust their offer to account for it, I suggested. If they value your client relationships and team enough, they might still see it as worthwhile. He shook his head, downing the scotch in one swallow. The debt would eat any reasonable offer. And even if they were willing, it would mean admitting I've been lying. To them, to our employees, to everyone, about our financial stability. The irony of his concern about lying to business associates while maintaining a web of deception with his own wife wasn't lost on me. Still, I felt a twinge of sympathy watching his carefully constructed world teeter on the edge of collapse. What will you do? I asked quietly. Daniel stared into his empty glass. I don't know. Try to negotiate, I guess. See if there's a way to structure the deal that addresses their concerns without revealing the full extent of the situation. In other words, continue the pattern of half-truths and strategic omissions that had characterized his business approach for years. I nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. What Daniel couldn't know was that TechSphere's acquisition team had already prepared for this scenario. Their due diligence had been thorough enough to uncover most of his financial issues before this confrontation. What remained uncertain was whether the company's other assets, particularly its client relationships, justified proceeding despite the debt. The next week brought a series of tense negotiations. Daniel came home later each night, increasingly desperate as TechSphere's team methodically dismantled his attempts to minimize the company's financial problems. They want to reduce the offer by 60%, he reported one night, pouring another scotch. Barely enough to cover the outstanding loans. After paying those off, there would be almost nothing left for me. At least the debt would be cleared, I pointed out carefully. You'd be free to start fresh. Daniel shot me an irritated look. Easy for you to say. You have your safe, boring job with its predictable paycheck. I've put everything into this company. Years of my life, our savings, my reputation. Walking away with nothing would be admitting failure. The dismissive characterization of my career, a career that had quietly made me a millionaire while he accumulated debt, stung as it always did. But now, knowing what I knew, it also struck me as tragically ironic. Sometimes cutting your losses is the smartest move, I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the frustration building inside me. If TechSphere is offering enough to clear, the debt, that's not nothing, that's freedom. Daniel didn't respond, lost in his own thoughts about what he perceived as the injustice of his situation. Later that night, I heard him on the phone in his office, his voice low but urgent as he apparently sought advice from someone. Likely Mark, his friend who worked in venture capital and had encouraged many of Daniel's riskiest business decisions. The next morning, Daniel announced that he'd decided to accept TechSphere's offer. You're right, he conceded with obvious reluctance. Getting out from under the debt is the priority. I can rebuild from there. I nodded, relieved that he was finally making a practical decision, however reluctantly. When would the deal close? They're pushing for within 60 days, he replied. The debt would be cleared as part of the closing process. 60 days. 2 months in which the loans would remain active. 2 months during which any missed payment could potentially derail the deal. 2 months of continued vulnerability for both of us. I made my decision that afternoon. Meeting with Robert, I outlined what I wanted to do. I need to pay off these loans, I said, showing him the documentation I'd gathered on Daniel's business debt, all of them, as soon as possible. Robert's eyebrows rose as he reviewed the total. That's a substantial sum, Emma. Are you sure this is how you want to use your assets? I'm sure, I replied firmly. My name is on enough of these loans to put my own financial future at risk if anything goes wrong with this acquisition. I want them cleared, and I want it done discreetly. The process took nearly 2 weeks to arrange. Each loan had to be paid through separate transactions to avoid alerting Daniel, who remained the primary contact on most accounts. Robert coordinated with the banks, ensuring each payment was processed correctly and confirmation sent only to my private email. The final payment, covering the original $250,000 loan I had co-signed, cleared on a Wednesday morning. I received the confirmation email while sitting in a TechSphere executive meeting, discussing quarterly projections as if my personal life wasn't undergoing a seismic shift. A strange sense of calm settled over me as I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly financially independent. The debt that had loomed over me, that had represented Daniel's power to affect my future, was gone. That evening, Daniel came home in unusually high spirits. "The TechSphere team called today," he announced, loosening his tie with a triumphant smile. "They've completed their financial review and are ready to proceed with the acquisition as discussed. Apparently, their concerns about our debt have been addressed." I maintained a neutral expression, nodding encouragingly. "That's wonderful. News? Did they explain what changed their minds?" "Not specifically," Daniel replied, too elated to question this stroke of good fortune. "But their lead negotiator mentioned something about our improved balance sheet, making the deal more attractive. Maybe Mark was right about how I presented our projections. Or maybe the complete absence of debt made the company suddenly much more valuable." I smiled, letting him believe what he needed to believe. "This calls for a celebration," I suggested, opening a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. As we toasted his apparent business success, I studied Daniel's face, the confidence returning to his features, the self-satisfaction in his smile, the complete absence of any recognition that his salvation had come from the wife he'd consistently underestimated. In that moment, I realized with perfect clarity that our marriage was over, had been over for longer than I'd been willing to admit. The revelation didn't bring pain or anger, just a profound sense of relief. Whatever happened next, whether Daniel discovered my role in saving his business from crushing debt, whether the acquisition proceeded as planned, whether my double life became public knowledge, I would face it on my own terms, from a position of strength I'd built carefully and deliberately while he wasn't paying attention. 2 days later, Daniel left a manila envelope on our kitchen island. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," he said, not meeting my eyes as I opened it to find divorce papers inside. "My lawyer says the terms are more than generous." I scanned the document, noting with grim amusement the provisions that assumed I was financially dependent on Daniel, that positioned him as the magnanimous provider offering support to his less successful wife. The settlement offered me a fraction of our marital assets while Daniel would retain the house, his business proceeds from the acquisition, and most of our joint investments. "I'll need some time to review these," I said mildly, tucking the papers back into the envelope. The momentous nature of this conversation, the formal end of our 8-year marriage, seemed to require more emotion than I felt. Shouldn't I be crying? Shouting? Begging him to reconsider? Instead, I felt only that same calm certainty that had settled over me when the final loan payment cleared. Daniel had made his choice, not knowing that I had already made mine weeks ago. Now it was simply a matter of revealing the truth, my truth at the moment of my choosing. "Take whatever time you need," Daniel replied, clearly relieved by my composed reaction. "But the acquisition will be finalizing soon, so it would be good to have this settled before then. I've got meetings with financial advisors next week to discuss investment options for the proceeds." I nodded, already mentally composing the email I would send to Lisa, outlining what I needed for the meeting that would change everything. "I think we should meet with both our lawyers present," I suggested, "to make sure everything is properly addressed." Daniel agreed easily, confident in the strength of his position, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to shift dramatically. As he left for what he claimed was a business dinner, but what the location tracking on his phone revealed was an evening at Olivia's apartment, I began making calls to set the final phase of my plan in motion. The stage was set for a revelation that would force Daniel to confront not just the end of our marriage, but the complete misconception he'd held about who exactly had been supporting whom all these years. And despite everything, some small part of me looked forward to finally being seen, truly seen, by the man who had looked right through me for far too long. I chose River Place Cafe for our meeting, neutral territory with enough privacy for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. The Saturday morning crowd created a pleasant background hum, providing both cover for our discussion and witnesses should Daniel react poorly to what I was about to reveal. I arrived early, selecting a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the Willamette River beyond. The water flowed calmly, belying the turbulence I anticipated. Lisa and Robert arrived together 15 minutes before our scheduled time, both dressed in casual weekend attire that still managed to convey professional competence. "Are you ready for this?" Lisa asked quietly as she took the seat beside me. Her expression was concerned but resolute, the same look she wore in difficult negotiations at TechSphere. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing the folder containing the documentation we'd prepared. Inside was irrefutable evidence of my financial status, copies of the loan payoff confirmations, and the company structure showing my ownership of Horizon Ventures, the entity that had acquired Daniel's marketing firm. Robert reviewed the papers, one last time, ensuring everything was in order. "Remember, the goal here is resolution, not retribution," he reminded me gently. "However satisfying it might be to see his reaction, keep the focus on moving forward with a fair settlement." I nodded, grateful for their support and the reminder. This wasn't about humiliating Daniel. It was about claiming my truth and ensuring my future wasn't compromised by his financial mismanagement. Still, I couldn't deny the small part of me that looked forward to finally dropping the facade I'd maintained for so long. Daniel arrived precisely on time, dressed in the casual but expensive style he preferred for weekend meetings, designer jeans, a tailored button-down, and the watch I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. He spotted me immediately but faltered momentarily when he saw I wasn't alone. The confident smile he'd prepared dimmed several watts as he approached our table. "I didn't realize this would be a group discussion," he said, eyes flicking between Lisa and Robert as he took the seat across from me. "Are these your lawyers?" "Lisa is my attorney," I acknowledged, gesturing toward her. "And Robert is my financial advisor. I thought it was important to have them present for this conversation." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your financial advisor? Since when do you have a financial advisor?" "Since about 4 years ago," I replied evenly. "There's a lot we need to discuss, Daniel. Things that will significantly impact the divorce settlement you proposed." He leaned back, recovered enough to appear merely curious rather than concerned. "I thought the terms were quite straightforward. My lawyer assured me they were more than fair given our respective situations." "That's exactly what we need to discuss," I said, opening the folder. "Our respective situations aren't quite what you've assumed them to be." I began with the simplest revelation, my actual position at TechSphere. I slid the company organizational chart across the table, watching as Daniel's eyes found my name near the top, the direct reporting line to the CEO impossible to miss. "Executive Vice President of Strategic Integration?" He read, disbelief, coloring his voice. "Since when?" 4 years, I replied. "Shortly after you started your marketing firm." Daniel stared at me, then back at the document. "But you never said anything about a promotion like this. You've always talked about your job as if it was ordinary. I chose to keep certain aspects of my professional life private." I said carefully, particularly after it became clear that you viewed my career as secondary to yours. A flash of defensiveness crossed his face. I never said your career wasn't important, You called it my safe, boring job last week, I interrupted. You've consistently minimized my work while expecting me to celebrate and support yours, but that's not actually the most relevant point for today's discussion. I proceeded to outline my actual compensation, the base salary, bonuses, and stock options that had quietly accumulated over the years. Robert provided supporting documentation, including statements of my personal accounts and investment portfolio. With each revelation, Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to shock to something approaching alarm. "This can't be right," he said finally, shuffling through the papers as if searching for an explanation. "You've been making this kind of money for years? While I've been struggling to keep my business afloat? While I've been taking out loans to cover expenses?" "Yes," I said simply. "I've been watching you dig that financial hole while deliberately keeping you in the dark about my own resources." "Why?" The question contained equal parts betrayal and bewilderment. Why would you hide this from me? It was the question I'd anticipated, yet hearing it still stung. The genuine confusion in his voice suggested he truly didn't understand the breach of trust that had prompted my secrecy. "Self-preservation," I replied after a moment. "When I realized how you were managing your business finances, taking out loans in both our names without full disclosure, hiding missed payments, maintaining a lifestyle we couldn't afford, I decided to protect myself." Daniel shook his head, struggling to reconcile this new information with the narrative he'd constructed. "But you could have helped me. With this kind of money, you could have solved all the cash flow problems, could have become your personal bank?" I finished. "Funded a business model that was fundamentally flawed, enabled financial decisions that consistently prioritized appearance over sustainability? That wouldn't have helped either of us in the long run." Lisa chose this moment to interject, her tone professionally neutral. "There's more you should be aware of regarding your company's acquisition by TechSphere, Mr. Wilson." Daniel's attention shifted reluctantly from me to Lisa. "What about it?" "That deal is nearly finalized. It has nothing to do with our divorce settlement." "Actually, it has everything to do with it," she continued, nodding to me to proceed with the next revelation. I drew a deep breath, knowing this would be the most difficult part for Daniel to process. "Do you recall when TechSphere first expressed interest in acquiring your company?" He nodded warily. "About 3 months ago. Their acquisition team reached out unexpectedly." "It wasn't exactly unexpected," I explained. "TechSphere has been expanding its service offerings through strategic acquisitions. Your company fit the profile of what we were looking for in terms of specialized marketing capabilities." Daniel's eyes narrowed at my use of "we," the implication slowly dawning. "Are you saying you had something to do with this acquisition?" "I disclosed my relationship to your company when it was identified as a potential acquisition target," I confirmed. "I recused myself from direct involvement in the valuation and negotiation process to avoid conflicts of interest. But yes, I was aware of TechSphere's interest in your firm before you were." He processed this information with visible effort, his breathing shallow. "So this whole time while I've been negotiating with TechSphere, stressed about whether the deal would go through, worried about them discovering the extent of the company's debt. You knew? You were part of it?" "I wasn't part of the negotiation team," I clarified. "But I was informed of major developments, yes." Daniel's hands clenched around the edge of the table. "And you never thought to mention this? To give me any insight or warning? Would you have wanted my help?" I asked quietly. "Or would you have seen it as interference, as me overstepping into your domain?" His silence was answer enough. Throughout our marriage, Daniel had carefully maintained the fiction that his business acumen was superior to mine, Accepting my help would have required acknowledging that I might understand something he didn't, a concession his pride had never allowed. "There's one more thing you should know," I continued after a moment, "about the company's debt." Robert slid another document across the table, the loan payoff confirmations I'd received weeks earlier. Daniel looked down at the papers, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "These are paid in full notices," he said slowly. "For all of the business loans, but that's not possible. The acquisition hasn't closed yet. TechSphere wasn't supposed to clear the debt until closing." "TechSphere didn't pay them off," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "I did." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the cafe seemed to fade as Daniel stared at me, struggling to comprehend. "You?" he finally managed. "You paid off nearly $300,000 of business debt? When? Why?" "2 months ago," I replied, "right before the acquisition offer was finalized. As for why, to protect myself. Those loans had my name attached to several of them. I wasn't willing to leave my financial future dependent on whether this deal closed successfully." Daniel stared at the loan documents, then raised his eyes to meet mine. I saw something I'd rarely witnessed in our years together. Genuine shock that stripped away his usual confidence, leaving bare confusion. In its place, "I don't understand," he said, his voice uncharacteristically small. "All this time, while I've been worried about money, while I've been working myself to the ground trying to keep the business afloat, trying to maintain our lifestyle. You were what? Secretly rich? Watching me struggle while sitting on millions?" The accusation in his tone sparked a flash of anger I'd been carefully containing. "Yes, Daniel. I watched you struggle. Struggle to maintain a lifestyle we couldn't afford. Struggle to prop up a business model that wasn't working. Struggle to keep up appearances rather than face reality. I offered to help with financial planning. You dismissed me. I suggested scaling back expenses. You insisted we were fine. I asked about the business finances. You told me not to worry my pretty little head about it." Daniel flinched at my words. Perhaps hearing his own dismissive tone reflected back at him. "That's not fair. I was trying to protect you from the stress." "No," I countered firmly. "You were protecting yourself. From admitting failure, from acknowledging mistakes, from having to see me as a financial equal or possibly even superior. And when that became clear, I started protecting myself too." Lisa placed a gentle hand on my arm, a reminder to keep the discussion productive. I took a steadying breath, collecting myself. "The point is, Daniel, the financial situation you've assumed in these divorce papers," I tapped the manila envelope he'd given me, "is fundamentally inaccurate. I am not financially dependent on you. In fact, quite the opposite. The house you proposed keeping, my down payment, my mortgage payments, the lifestyle you've enjoyed, largely funded by my income while yours went back into your struggling business. And now, the debt-free company you're about to sell, made possible by my decision to pay off its obligations." Daniel sat in stunned silence, the carefully constructed reality he'd built crumbling visibly around him. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of its usual confidence. "So what happens now?" It was Robert who answered, his professional demeanor providing a steadying influence. "Now, we negotiate a settlement that reflects the actual financial contributions and situations of both parties. One that acknowledges Ms. Wilson's substantial assets and Mr. Wilson's soon-to-be-acquired proceeds from the TechSphere acquisition." I slid a counter-proposal across the table, one Lisa and I had prepared after reviewing Daniel's initial offer. "These terms reflect reality rather than assumption," I explained. "I keep my TechSphere position, stock options, and personal investments. You retain the acquisition payment, which is substantial enough to restart your life comfortably. We sell the house and split the proceeds proportionally based on our contributions." Daniel scanned the document, his expression unreadable. "And if I don't agree to these terms?" "Then we proceed to court," Lisa replied matter-of-factly, "where financial discovery will reveal everything we've shared today, plus documentation of your personal expenses with various companions over the past 2 years." His head snapped up at that, eyes widening. "What are you talking about?" I met his gaze steadily. "I know about Olivia, Daniel, and the others before her. I've known for quite some time." The color drained from his face as the final piece of his carefully constructed fiction collapsed. "How?" "It doesn't really matter how," I said softly. "What matters is that I'm not interested in a messy, public divorce that drags both our names through the mud. I've kept documentation of your extracurricular activities, not as leverage, but as protection. I'd prefer not to use it." Daniel stared down at the counterproposal, the fight visibly draining from him as the full impact of his situation became clear. His wife of 8 years, the woman he'd consistently underestimated, whose career he'd dismissed, whose financial acumen he'd questioned, had not only been secretly wealthy, but had also saved his business from crushing debt while fully aware of his infidelity. "You've known everything," he said quietly, "all this time." "Not everything," I corrected him gently, "but enough." We sat in silence for several long moments, the background noise of the cafe resuming its normal rhythm. Finally, Daniel looked up, a new expression crossing his face, one I couldn't immediately identify. "Why did you pay off the debt?" he asked. "You could have let me fail, could have let the acquisition fall through when they discovered how bad things really were, could have watched me crash and burn. Why didn't you?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly in the weeks since making that final payment. The answer had only become clear to me recently. "Because that's not who I am," I replied simply. "Watching you fail wouldn't have given me any satisfaction. And regardless of what's happened between us, I once loved you enough to marry you. That person deserved a chance at a fresh start, even if our marriage couldn't be saved." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a recognition perhaps of the grace being extended despite his actions. Without another word, he reached for a pen and signed the counter-proposal. "I assume your lawyers will handle the rest," he said, sliding the document back across the table. "Is there anything else we need to discuss?" There was one final thing, a gesture not of practical necessity, but of emotional closure. I reached into my purse and placed a small velvet box on the table between us. "I'd like to return this," I said, opening the box to reveal the platinum wedding band he'd given me on our wedding day. "Not out of anger, but because I think we both need a clean break." Daniel stared at the ring, then back at me, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his features. "I don't understand how you did it," he finally said. "How did you become this person without me knowing?" The question revealed so much about how little he'd ever really seen me. "I was always this person," I replied simply. "You just never took the time to look." With that, I gathered my documents and stood to leave, Robert and Lisa flanking me protectively. Daniel remained seated, still staring at the wedding ring as if it might provide answers to questions he was only now beginning to ask. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours on Monday," I said. "I hope we can make this transition as painless as possible for both of us." Daniel nodded absently, then looked up with an expression I'd rarely seen from him. Uncertainty. "What will you do now?" It was a question I'd been considering for weeks, ever since I'd realized our marriage was beyond saving. The woman who had hidden her success to protect herself from a husband's financial recklessness was ready to step fully into the light. "Live authentically," I replied. "No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than I am. Beyond that, I haven't decided yet." As I walked away from the table, away from the man I had once built my life around, I felt lighter with each step. The burden of deception, a burden I had taken on for protection but which had become its own kind of prison, lifted with each stride toward the door. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of cherry blossoms from nearby trees. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with possibility. "Are you okay?" Lisa asked, genuine concern in her voice as we walked toward the parking area. "Yes," I realized with mild surprise. "I really am." Later that evening, as I packed essentials for my temporary stay at Jessica's house, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "I signed the counter proposal. You'll have it Monday. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long moment, considering a response. What was there to say to the man who had simultaneously been my greatest love and my greatest disappointment? In the end, I set the phone aside, without replying. Some endings don't require further dialogue. Some apologies come too late to matter. Jessica welcomed me with open arms and a bottle of good wine when I arrived at her riverside condo that evening. After helping me settle into her guest room, she poured 2 generous glasses and led me to her balcony overlooking the water. "So," she said, settling into a comfortable chair. "How did he take it?" I sipped my wine, considering the question. Better than I expected, worse than I hoped. He was shocked. I don't think it ever occurred to him that I might have been more successful than he was all this time. Jessica snorted inelegantly. Men like Daniel rarely consider that possibility. It threatens their entire worldview. She studied me over the rim of her glass. "Are you sad?" The question gave me pause. Shouldn't I be grieving the end of my 8-year marriage? Shouldn't there be tears, regrets, second thoughts? "Not sad, exactly," I replied slowly. "Relieved, mostly. Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying for years." "The secret of your success?" Jessica suggested. "That, and the pretense of being less than I am," I agreed. "Do you know how exhausting it is to constantly downplay your achievements? To pretend financial concerns that don't exist? To watch someone make terrible decisions that affect you while biting your tongue because challenging them would reveal too much?" Jessica nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine. So what's next? For Emma Wilson, secret millionaire?" I laughed at the description, though it wasn't entirely inaccurate. "First, the divorce. Clean, quick, as drama-free as possible. And after that," she pressed, "back to your executive suite at TechSphere, new house, travel. There must be things you've wanted to do that didn't fit with the image you maintained for Daniel's benefit." She had a point. For years, I'd made choices that maintained my cover story. Driving a modest car instead of the luxury vehicle I could easily afford. Living in a house that was comfortable but not reflective of my actual means. Taking vacations to destinations Daniel selected rather than the places I longed to explore. "I think I'll start with a place of my own," I decided. "Somewhere that reflects my taste completely, without compromise." "Downtown loft?" Jessica suggested. "Riverview? One of those new buildings with the rooftop gardens?" I smiled, warming to the idea. "Maybe. And I've always wanted to visit Japan during cherry blossom season. Daniel always said it was too far, too expensive, not worth the trouble." "Put it on the list," Jessica encouraged. "What else?" As the evening progressed, my mental list grew longer. Experiences I'd postponed, interests I'd suppressed, aspects of myself I'd minimized to maintain harmony with a partner who had never fully appreciated the woman I was. With each addition, I felt my future expanding, bright with possibilities that had nothing to do with Daniel or the life we'd constructed together. The divorce proceeded with surprising efficiency once Daniel accepted the reality of our financial situations. His initial shock gave way to a practical recognition that fighting would only prolong the inevitable, while potentially making public the extent to which he had misjudged his own wife. The final papers were signed 3 months after our coffee shop meeting, dissolving our partnership with the same dispassionate efficiency with which business contracts are terminated. I purchased a loft in a renovated industrial building downtown, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering sweeping views of the river and mountains beyond. For the first time in my adult life, I furnished a space exactly as I wanted it. Clean lines, bold art, a home office with the latest technology rather than the deliberately outdated setup I'd maintained in our shared house. At TechSphere, I embraced my role fully, no longer downplaying my authority or minimizing my contributions in conversations outside the office. The confidence I'd always possessed in professional settings extended into my personal life, creating a seamless integration of the woman I had always been but had carefully compartmentalized. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was appointed Chief Strategy Officer at TechSphere, a position that came with a seat on the board of directors. The announcement made the business section of the Portland Tribune. Jessica texted me a screenshot of the article with a simple message. He definitely knows now. The thought of Daniel seeing that announcement, final confirmation of how thoroughly he had misjudged the woman he'd been married to, produced no particular satisfaction. By then, his knowledge or opinion had ceased to matter. The woman who had hidden her success to protect herself from a husband's financial recklessness and emotional betrayal no longer existed. The woman who signed the executive appointment acceptance letter was simply me, Emma Wilson, no longer defined by secrets or strategies or survival. 1 year to the day after our coffee shop confrontation, I stood on a hillside in Kyoto, surrounded by cherry blossoms in full bloom. Their delicate pink petals drifted through the air like snow, covering the ground in a soft carpet that muffled my footsteps as I walked among ancient temples. Traveling alone had never been in my plans during marriage, but I found I enjoyed the freedom to set my own pace, to change directions on a whim, to spend an entire afternoon in a tiny tea house simply watching the world go by. My phone buzzed with an email notification. TechSphere's latest acquisition had been approved by the board, another strategic expansion I had helped orchestrate. I read the message with satisfaction, then silenced the device and returned it to my pocket. Work would wait. This moment of perfect beauty demanded my full attention. As I watched cherry blossoms swirl in the gentle spring breeze, I thought about the woman I had been a year earlier. Capable but constrained, successful but secretive, wealthy but pretending otherwise. The contortions I had performed to maintain, that fiction seemed impossible now, like a story I'd read about someone else. Sometimes I wondered where Daniel had landed after our divorce. I'd heard through mutual connections that he'd relocated to Chicago, accepting a position with a mid-sized marketing firm rather than attempting to rebuild his own company. Whether he had learned anything from our ending remained unclear, though. The fact that he'd chosen employment over entrepreneurship suggested at least some recalibration of his self-image. In my more generous moments, I hoped he had. I hoped the shock of discovering how thoroughly he had misread his own wife might have prompted some self-reflection, some recognition of the patterns that had led to our dissolution. Not for my sake. I had made my peace with our ending, but for his own growth and for whoever might come after me in his life. A gust of wind showered me with cherry blossoms, drawing me back to the present moment. I lifted my face to the gentle caress of petals against my skin, savoring the simple joy of being exactly where I was, exactly as I was. No pretense, no performance, no careful calculation of what was safe to reveal. Living authentically had been its own kind of revelation. Without the constant vigilance required to maintain my cover story, I had discovered energy for new interests, new connections, new challenges both personal and professional. The woman who had once clipped coupons while managing millions in investments now moved through the world with an integration of purpose that felt like coming home to myself. As I continued my solitary walk through the temple gardens, I felt profound gratitude for the painful journey that had led me here. Daniel's betrayal, both financial and emotional, had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationship and my own complicity in maintaining destructive patterns. The double life I had created as protection had eventually become a cage of its own, limiting what I could express, experience, and embrace. Freedom, I had discovered, wasn't found in financial independence, though that certainly helped. It wasn't found in professional success or validation from others. True freedom came from the courage to live without apology or artificial constraint, to be fully myself, whether anyone was watching or not. A temple bell sounded in the distance, its deep resonance spreading across the hillside like ripples in still water. I paused to listen, allowing its vibration to move through me, a reminder of the impermanence of all things, pain and pleasure, triumph and defeat, beginnings and endings. Whatever came next in my story, I would face it as my complete self, the strategist and the dreamer, the executive and the wanderer, the woman who had learned through difficult experience that the greatest power lies not in what we accumulate or achieve, but in the courage to be genuinely, unapologetically who we are. Cherry blossoms continued to fall around me, beautiful in their brief, perfect blooming. Like them, I had my season now, not hidden in someone else's shadow, but standing, in my own light, vibrant and visible, exactly as I was meant to be. The morning after the cafe confrontation, I woke in Jessica's guest room feeling strangely at peace. Sunlight streamed through unfamiliar curtains, casting patterns across a bed that wasn't mine, in a room where nothing carried the weight of shared history. For the first time in years, I had no secrets to maintain, no appearance to uphold, no careful calculations about what I could reveal and what must remain hidden. I reached for my phone, expecting to find a barrage of messages from Daniel, angry accusations, desperate explanations, attempts to renegotiate. Instead, there was only the single text from the night before. I signed the counter-proposal. You'll have it Monday. I'm sorry. No demands for further discussion, no pleas to reconsider. Just acceptance and a simple apology that could never encompass all that had transpired between us. I set the phone aside without replying and padded to the kitchen where Jessica was already brewing coffee. "Sleep okay?" she asked, sliding a steaming mug toward me. Her expression was carefully neutral, giving me space to define the emotional terrain of this new day. "Better than I have in months," I admitted, breathing in the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. No dreams, no waking up at 3 a.m. worried about what Daniel might be hiding, what might come crashing down on us next. Jessica nodded, leaning against the counter. "Freedom looks good on you already." "Freedom?" I repeated, testing the word like an unfamiliar flavor. "I'm not sure I even know what that means yet." "You'll figure it out," she assured me. One day at a time. That first day of freedom began with practical matters, calling my lawyer to confirm Daniel's acceptance of the counter-proposal, arranging for movers to collect the rest of my belongings from the house, notifying HR at TechSphere of my new address. Mundane tasks that nonetheless felt significant, each one a small step toward dismantling the elaborate fiction I'd been living. By mid-afternoon, the practicalities were handled, leaving me at loose ends in Jessica's sunlit living room. The sudden absence of secrets to maintain, of appearances to uphold, created a strange vacuum. Who was I when not defined by the careful dance of concealment and revelation I'd been performing for years? "You look lost," Jessica observed, finding me staring out at the river. "Want to talk about it?" I shook my head, not yet able to articulate the disorientation I felt. "I think I need some air. Mind if I borrow your car?" The drive along the Columbia River Gorge had always been my refuge in times of uncertainty. As city streets gave way to winding roads hugging cliffs above the river, I felt my thoughts begin to settle. I pulled over at a scenic viewpoint, cut the engine, and stepped out into the crisp spring air. Below me, the Columbia stretched wide and powerful, carving its ancient path through basalt cliffs. Above, hawks rode thermal currents with effortless grace. I stood at the railing, letting the wind whip my hair around my face, and finally allowed myself to feel the full magnitude of what had occurred. My marriage was over. The carefully constructed life I'd shared with Daniel, the home, the routines, the future plans, all of it gone in a matter of hours. Yet, unlike most divorcing spouses, I felt no financial anxiety, no uncertainty about how I would support myself, no fear of starting over. The safety net I'd built had caught me exactly as intended. What I hadn't anticipated was the emotional complexity that would accompany this transition. Relief, yes. Overwhelming relief at no longer needing to hide my success or tolerate Daniel's dismissive attitude toward my capabilities. But also grief for the partnership that had once held such promise, for the man I had loved before ambition and insecurity warped him into someone who could betray me so thoroughly. And beneath both emotions, something else stirred. Excitement. Tentative at first, then growing stronger as I contemplated the possibilities that lay ahead. A life defined entirely by my own choices. A home reflecting only my taste. Financial decisions made without compromise or concealment. Relationships, personal and professional, based on authentic representation of who I was and what I valued. By the time I returned to Jessica's condo that evening, something had shifted inside me. The disorientation hadn't completely vanished, but it had transformed into something more akin to anticipation, the slightly vertiginous feeling of standing at the beginning of an uncharted path. "Better?" Jessica asked, as I hung her car keys on the hook by the door. "Clearer," I replied. "I think I'm ready to start figuring out what freedom means for me." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Mornings found me at TechSphere, earlier than usual, embracing my executive role with renewed energy now that I no longer needed to downplay my position or authority. Evenings were spent exploring. Restaurants I'd wanted to try, but Daniel had dismissed as too experimental. Art galleries featuring works that would never have fit our shared aesthetic. Neighborhoods I might want to call home. I toured 12 properties before finding the loft that spoke to me, a corner unit in a converted warehouse with soaring ceilings, exposed brick walls, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The realtor quoted a price that would have made Daniel blanch, but which represented a sensible investment given my actual financial position. "It needs some work," the realtor cautioned, noting my interest. "The previous owner started renovations, but ran out of funding. You'd be taking it on as a project." I walked the space again, seeing past the unfinished floors and partially updated kitchen to what it could become. A project was exactly what I needed, something to pour my creative energy into, a tangible representation of the new life I was building. "I'll take it," I decided, already envisioning the space transformed. "As is." The realtor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Don't you want to consult with anyone? Bring someone else to look at it before deciding?" The question highlighted how accustomed I'd become to performing the role of the deferential wife, the one who wouldn't make major decisions without her husband's approval. I met the realtor's gaze directly. "No," I replied firmly. "I don't need anyone else's opinion. This is exactly what I want." Signing the purchase documents the following week felt like a declaration of independence. For the first time, I was acquiring property solely in my name, making decisions based entirely on my preferences, without the need to justify or explain my choices to anyone else. While the loft underwent renovations, I threw myself into work with renewed focus. The strategic acquisition team I led was evaluating potential targets that would expand TechSphere's market position in emerging sectors. My personal experience with Daniel's company had provided valuable insights into the human element of acquisitions, the fear, pride, and attachment that often complicated what appeared on paper to be straightforward business decisions. "You've Changed, observed Thomas, our CEO, after a particularly successful negotiation with a healthcare software provider we'd been courting for months. There's a directness to your approach that wasn't there before. It's effective. I considered his observation as we walked back to our offices. I've simplified my life, I replied carefully. Eliminated some complications that were dividing my attention. Thomas nodded, not pressing for details. In the corporate world, personal disclosures were offered sparingly, if at all. Still, those closest to me at TechSphere had noticed the subtle shift in my demeanor since separating from Daniel, a new straightforwardness in my communication, a willingness to claim credit for my ideas, an absence of the careful self-deprecation I'd previously employed to make my intelligence less threatening. Lisa, who understood the full context of these changes, remarked on it during one of our regular lunch meetings. "You're not filtering yourself anymore," she noted. "It's like watching someone switch to high definition after years of standard broadcast." The observation made me laugh, but she wasn't wrong. The energy I'd once devoted to maintaining my cover story, to being the version of Emma Wilson that Daniel found acceptable and unthreatening, was now available for other purposes. My thinking was clearer, my decision-making more confident, my presence in both professional and personal settings more fully embodied. This newfound clarity extended to my financial management as well. With Robert's guidance, I restructured my investment portfolio to align with my long-term goals rather than the compromised version I'd maintained during marriage. I established a charitable foundation focused on financial literacy for women, remembering how my own financial knowledge had served as a protective shield when my marriage began to unravel. When the divorce was finalized 3 months after our cafe confrontation, the moment carried less emotional weight than I'd anticipated. The court documents arrived by courier to my temporary office at TechSphere, the final page bearing Daniel's signature above mine. I signed where indicated, returned the documents to my lawyer, and continued with my day as if nothing momentous had occurred. It was only that evening, alone in Jessica's guest room, that the significance of the moment fully registered. I was no longer Emma Wilson, wife of Daniel Wilson. I was simply Emma Wilson, answerable only to myself. The realization prompted an unexpected wave of tears, not of grief or regret, but of release. The woman who had maintained a double life for years, who had hidden her capabilities to protect a husband's fragile ego, who had constructed an elaborate facade to shield herself from financial ruin, that woman could finally rest. In her place stood someone both familiar and new, the authentic core of who I'd always been, now free to exist without constraint or apology. My loft was ready for occupancy exactly 5 months after the cafe confrontation. Moving day arrived bright and clear, the July sun warming brick facades throughout the Pearl District as movers carried carefully labeled boxes into the freight elevator of my new building. I'd purchased only the essentials from my previous life with Daniel. My books, my art collection, kitchen equipment I'd personally selected. Everything else, the furniture we'd chosen together, the decor that represented compromised taste, the accumulation of 8 years of shared life, I left behind, preferring to begin fresh rather than surround myself with reminders of what had been lost. The open plan of the loft welcomed light from 3 exposures, the afternoon sun casting warm patches across new hardwood floors I'd selected for their rich, honey tones. The kitchen gleamed with commercial-grade appliances and concrete countertops, practical, durable materials that made no pretense of being anything other than what they were. Most striking was the wall of windows overlooking the Willamette River, offering a sweeping view from the downtown bridges to the distant mountains. I stood before them as the movers brought in the last of my belongings, watching the river flow past at its own unhurried pace. "Will there be anything else, Ms. Wilson?" asked the moving foreman, clipboard in hand. I turned from the view, taking in the space that was now unequivocally mine, a physical manifestation of the freedom I'd been exploring these past months. No, I replied with a small smile. This is perfect. Thank you. After the movers departed, I moved through the loft slowly, familiarizing myself with its dimensions, its light, its particular energy. In the primary bedroom, floor to ceiling, windows framed the sunset, washing the space in golden light. The ensuite bathroom featured a soaking tub positioned to take advantage of the city view, an indulgence I'd always wanted, but Daniel had dismissed as impractical. The second bedroom I'd converted to a home office, installing the technology I'd previously hidden in the secret workspace of our old house. Here, monitors displaying real-time market data and TechSphere operations stood in plain sight, no longer concealed behind false walls or locked doors. Most significant was the living area, an open expanse I'd furnished sparingly with pieces chosen for beauty and function rather than status or show. A sectional sofa in butterscotch leather deep enough for napping. Bookshelves crafted by a local artisan, filled with volumes Daniel had never understood my interest in. Financial theory, technical manuals, obscure poetry. On the main wall hung the painting I'd purchased 7 years earlier, but had kept in storage throughout my marriage. An abstract piece in blues and golds that Daniel had deemed pretentious nonsense when I'd first shown it to him. In the loft's open space, lit by the sophisticated track lighting I'd installed, it was breathtaking, exactly as I'd known it would be when I first saw it in a small gallery in Seattle. I opened a bottle of champagne, not to celebrate the end of my marriage, but to christen this new beginning. As twilight descended over Portland, I raised a glass to my reflection in the darkening windows. To living authentically, I toasted myself quietly. No more hiding. The weeks that followed established new patterns and rhythms. Mornings began with coffee on my balcony, watching the city come to life below. Work remained challenging and fulfilling, but no longer consumed all my energy. The reserves previously dedicated to maintaining my cover story now available for other interests and pursuits. I joined a rowing club that practiced on the Willamette in the early morning hours, rediscovering a sport I'd loved in college, but had abandoned when Daniel complained about the early alarms and weekend competitions. The physical exertion cleared my mind, while the teamwork satisfied a craving for connection that had gone unmet in my isolated double life. Evenings found me exploring Portland with new eyes, trying restaurants Daniel had dismissed as too experimental, attending performances he'd considered boring, accepting invitations to events where I could simply be myself without calculation or pretense. It was at one such event, a fundraiser for the Portland Art Museum, that I encountered James Peterson, TechSphere's chief technology officer. Though we'd worked for the same company for years, our paths rarely crossed directly, his department focusing on product development while mine handled strategic growth. "Emma Wilson," he said, approaching with 2 glasses of wine and offering one to me. "The museum's newest benefactor, I hear." I accepted the glass with a smile, slightly surprised he knew about my recent donation. Word travels fast. "The development director is my cousin," he explained with an easy grin. "She was quite impressed by your contribution and by your knowledge of contemporary Asian artists." I sipped the wine, a crisp Pinot Gris from a local vineyard. "I've developed an interest in the last few years. Along with rowing, gourmet cooking, and architectural renovation," he added, eyes twinkling. "You've been busy since your divorce." The direct reference to my personal life might once have unsettled me, accustomed as I'd been to keeping strict boundaries between my professional and private spheres. Now, I merely raised an eyebrow. "You seem remarkably well informed about my activities, James." He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Portland's a small city in some ways, and you've made quite an impression these past few months, stepping more visibly into your executive role, buying one of the most distinctive properties in the Pearl District, establishing a foundation for women's financial literacy. All Things that were always part of who I am, I replied. Just less visible before. James studied me with genuine curiosity. Why is that, I wonder? You've been at TechSphere longer than I have, and your track record speaks for itself. Yet until recently, I think many of us didn't fully appreciate the scope of your capabilities. It was a perceptive observation from someone I'd interacted with only in controlled professional contexts. I considered how to respond, weighing my newfound commitment to authenticity against old habits of discretion. My previous circumstances required a certain compartmentalization, I said finally. That's no longer necessary. James nodded, accepting the partial explanation without pressing further. We shifted to discussing the exhibition we'd both come to support, discovering a shared appreciation for contemporary sculpture and installations that challenged conventional perspectives. By the end of the evening, we'd established an easy rapport that blended professional respect with personal connection, a type of interaction I'd carefully avoided during my marriage, aware of Daniel's tendency toward jealousy and his dismissal of my professional relationships as boring shop talk. I've enjoyed our conversation, James said as the event wound down. Perhaps we could continue it sometime. There's a new exhibit opening at Blue Sky Gallery next weekend. The invitation hung between us, casual yet intentional, professional yet personal. In the past, I would have deflected automatically, maintaining the careful separation between my work identity and personal life. Now, I found myself considering the possibility of expanding my newly authentic life to include new connections. I'd like that, I replied simply. Walking home along the river that night, I reflected on how profoundly my approach to relationships had shifted since leaving Daniel. The walls I'd built to protect my secret life had also isolated me, limiting my ability to form genuine connections with others. Now, those walls were coming down brick by brick, allowing for interactions based on mutual interest and respect rather than calculation and concealment. The exhibition with James led to dinner the following week, which evolved into regular conversations about art, technology, and the future of our industry. Our connection remained comfortably in the ambiguous territory between professional friendship and potential romance, neither of us in any hurry to define or constrain what was emerging organically between us. "You're dating your CTO, Lisa," declared over lunch 6 weeks after the museum fundraiser. It's all over the office grapevine. I set down my fork, genuinely surprised. I'm not dating James. We've attended some exhibitions together, had a few dinners. It's hardly a relationship. Lisa gave me a knowing look. The Emma Wilson of a year ago wouldn't have done even that much. You would have kept any personal connection firmly separated from your professional world. She wasn't wrong. The compartmentalization that had defined my marriage had extended to all aspects of my life, creating separate spheres that rarely intersected. I'm still figuring out where the boundaries should be, I admitted. Without the need for secrecy, everything feels different. Different good? Lisa pressed. I considered the question, thinking of the easy conversations with James, the absence of calculation in our interactions, the simple pleasure of sharing interests without hidden agendas or power dynamics. Different authentic, I replied finally. Whether it's good remains to be seen. That authenticity was tested unexpectedly the following month when TechSphere's leadership team gathered for quarterly strategy meetings. As Chief Strategy Officer, a promotion I'd received shortly after finalizing my divorce, I was presenting our acquisition targets for the coming year. Midway through my presentation, the CFO interrupted with a pointed question about the valuation methodology for a particularly complex target. Before I could respond, James spoke up from across the conference table. "If I may," he interjected, "I think what Emma's proposing actually addresses the concern you're raising, Alan. If you look at the projected integration costs on page 17. He proceeded to explain my analysis in different terms, essentially restating what my presentation had already covered. It was exactly the kind of well-intentioned but undermining assistance Daniel had often provided in social settings, explaining my own ideas back to me as if I needed help articulating them. The room fell silent as James finished, all eyes moving between us. In the past, I might have smiled gratefully, playing into the dynamic to avoid conflict. Today, I met his gaze directly. "Thank you, James," I said evenly, "but I believe I can address Alan's question myself." Turning back to the CFO, I continued with my original explanation, adding detailed financial projections that demonstrated the thoroughness of my analysis. After the meeting, James approached me in the hallway, his expression concerned. "I hope I didn't overstep earlier. I was just trying to support your position." I considered deflecting, reverting to the conflict-avoidant patterns that had characterized my marriage. Instead, I chose honesty. "I appreciate the intention," I replied carefully, "but when you jump in to explain my analysis, it undermines my authority in the room. I don't need that kind of assistance." James looked genuinely startled, then thoughtful. "I hadn't considered it that way. I'm sorry, Emma. It won't happen again." The exchange was brief but significant, a clear statement of boundaries without anger or accusation, met with respect rather than defensiveness. It confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Authentic relationships, whether professional or personal, required honesty that sometimes created momentary discomfort, but ultimately built stronger foundations. That evening, as I prepared dinner in my loft kitchen, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, the first direct communication since the divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. "In town for meetings next week. Need to collect remaining personal items from storage. Can we arrange a time?" The message was practical, emotionless, appropriate for ex-spouses with no children or ongoing financial entanglements. Yet seeing his name on my screen sent an unexpected ripple of emotion through me. Not longing or regret, but a strange sense of distance, as if the message had come from someone I'd known in another lifetime. I replied with equal practicality, suggesting he contact the storage facility directly as I'd already authorized them to release his belongings. He responded with a simple, "Thanks," and just like that, the exchange was complete, likely the last communication we would ever need to have. Later that night, curled on my sofa with a glass of wine and a book I'd been meaning to read for months, I found myself reflecting on the parallel paths Daniel and I had taken since our separation. Through mutual connections, I'd heard he'd relocated to Chicago, accepting a position with an established marketing firm rather than attempting to launch another business of his own. The choice suggested some recalibration had occurred. Perhaps the shock of discovering how thoroughly he had misread his own wife had prompted reflection on other aspects of his self-perception. Or perhaps the financial cushion provided by the acquisition payment had simply allowed him the luxury of a fresh start, away from the whispers that had inevitably followed our divorce. I hoped, in an abstract way, that he had found some measure of peace or at least insight from the collapse of our marriage. Not for my sake. I had moved beyond needing anything from Daniel, including his growth or understanding, but for whoever might come after me in his life. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from James. "Just finished reading that book you recommended. You were right. Brilliant final chapter. Free for coffee tomorrow to discuss?" I smiled, setting aside thoughts of the past to respond to this invitation firmly rooted in my present. The contrast between the two messages couldn't have been more striking. One, the final administrative detail of a closed chapter, the other, an open-ended question leading toward possibilities yet to unfold. 6 months to the day after the cafe confrontation that had ended my marriage, I stood in my loft watching an autumn storm sweep across the city. Rain lashed against the windows, transforming the view into an impressionist painting of lights and reflections. Inside, a fire crackled in the gas fireplace, casting warm light across the space I'd created entirely on my own terms. On my dining table lay the final paperwork for a professional milestone. My appointment as Chief Strategy Officer of TechSphere, complete with a seat on the board of directors. The announcement would appear in tomorrow's business section of the Portland Tribune, a public acknowledgement of the position and influence I'd wielded quietly for years. The promotion brought with it substantial additions to my compensation package, though the financial aspect held less significance for me than it might have once. What mattered more was the recognition, the acknowledgement of my contributions, my vision, my value to the organization I'd helped build. Jessica had texted earlier with her customary directness. He definitely knows now. The implication was clear. Daniel would inevitably see the announcement, would be forced to confront yet again how profoundly he had underestimated me throughout our marriage. Yet as I watched lightning illuminate the rain-soaked city, I realized I felt no anticipation about Daniel's reaction, no lingering desire for vindication or recognition. Whatever he might think upon seeing my name and new title in print was entirely irrelevant to the life I was now living. The freedom I'd been exploring these past 6 months wasn't just financial independence or professional recognition, though both were significant. The true freedom was in no longer measuring my choices, my success, or my happiness against anyone else's perception, particularly not Daniel's. A knock at my door interrupted these reflections. I opened it to find James, rain-damp and smiling, holding a bottle of champagne. "I heard about the promotion," he said by way of greeting. "Thought it deserved a proper celebration." I stepped aside to let him in, accepting both the champagne and the genuine warmth in his congratulations. As we settled by the fire with filled glasses, conversation flowed easily between professional topics and personal ones, neither territory requiring the careful navigation I'd once employed. "To Emma Wilson," James toasted, raising his glass, "the most formidable strategic mind I know." I touched my glass to his, a smile spreading across my face. "To authenticity," I countered, "and all the possibilities it creates." Outside, the storm continued its dramatic display, but inside my loft, my sanctuary, my creation, my statement of self, there was only warmth, connection, and the quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be, living exactly as I was meant to live. The double life that had once seemed necessary for survival had given way to something far more powerful. A single, integrated life lived with full awareness of my worth and capabilities. The woman who had hidden her success to protect herself from a husband's financial recklessness and emotional betrayal no longer existed. In her place stood simply me, Emma Wilson, no longer defined by secrets or strategies or survival, but by the freedom to be fully, unapologetically myself. 2 years after signing those divorce papers, I found myself standing on a balcony in Tokyo, watching cherry blossoms swirl in the spring breeze. The trip I'd always wanted to take but Daniel had dismissed as impractical spread before me in a sea of pink petals and ancient temples. My life had transformed in ways I could scarcely have imagined when I first discovered those hidden loan documents in our home office. The promotion to Chief Strategy Officer at TechSphere had been followed by increasing recognition in Portland's business community. The foundation for women's financial literacy I'd established was now helping hundreds of women gain the knowledge and confidence to control their own financial destinies. My downtown loft had become not just a home, but a statement of independence, featured in a local design magazine as an example of sophisticated urban living. All achievements I was proud of, yet what brought me the most satisfaction wasn't measurable by traditional metrics. It was the internal shift, the quiet confidence that came from living authentically, from making decisions based solely on my own judgment, from building relationships founded on honesty rather than calculation or concealment. A notification pinged on my phone, an email from Jessica with a link to a business article. "Thought you might find this interesting," her message read. The article featured Daniel's new marketing venture in Chicago, describing him as bringing fresh perspective to traditional approaches after his successful exit from a Portland-based firm. The reporter had clearly accepted his carefully crafted narrative without question. I scrolled through the article, feeling nothing but a detached curiosity about this person who had once been the center of my world. The photographs showed him in a sleek downtown office, his expression serious but approachable, a new watch gleaming on his wrist. He looked successful, confident, exactly the image he had worked so hard to project during our marriage, regardless of the financial reality behind it. What struck me most was my own reaction, or rather, the lack of it. There was no sting of betrayal, no lingering resentment, not even satisfaction at having escaped the inevitable collapse of his financial house of cards. Daniel's life, his choices, his successes or failures, none of it affected me anymore. The emotional cord had been completely severed. I closed the article without finishing it and turned back to the cherry blossoms, inhaling their subtle fragrance. Tomorrow, I would visit Kyoto's ancient temples, then travel to Hakone for the hot springs I'd booked as a birthday gift to myself. My itinerary was entirely my own, shaped by my interests and preferences without compromise or justification. My phone rang with an international call, James checking in from Portland, where he was overseeing the integration of our newest acquisition. Our relationship had evolved gradually from professional respect to friendship to something deeper, each step taken with conscious awareness rather than the headlong rush that had characterized my early days with Daniel. "How's Tokyo?" he asked when I answered, his voice clear despite the distance. "Everything I hoped it would be," I replied, watching a petal land softly on the railing beside me. "The cherry blossoms are at their peak. I've taken hundreds of photos. I can't wait to see them," he said warmly. "The team sends their regards. Everything's on track with the integration, so enjoy your vacation without worrying." The conversation continued easily, touching on work matters, personal observations, plans for when I returned. There was an easiness to our connection that I'd never experienced with Daniel. No power struggles, no need to minimize my achievements or amplify his. We existed as equals, each complete and self-sufficient, choosing to share our lives rather than depending on the other for validation or support. After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, reflecting on how dramatically my understanding of relationships had evolved. With Daniel, I'd unconsciously accepted the premise that marriage required sacrifice, particularly from women. I'd diminished myself to maintain harmony, setting aside authentic expression for the sake of his comfort and ego. Now I recognized that true partnership demanded nothing of the sort. It thrived on authenticity, on both people bringing their full selves to the relationship rather than carefully edited versions. It required mutual respect so deeply rooted that neither person felt threatened by the other's success or capabilities. As twilight descended over Tokyo, lights began to twinkle across the vast cityscape, millions of lives unfolding simultaneously in their own complex patterns. Somewhere in Chicago, Daniel was presumably building his new business, perhaps repeating old patterns, or perhaps, I hope this for his sake, learning from past mistakes. His story continued without me, as mine continued without him. I thought of the young women participating in my foundation's financial literacy programs, learning to read balance sheets and investment prospectuses, gaining the knowledge that had served as my shield when my marriage crumbled. Financial independence isn't just about money, I often told them. It's about having options, about never being trapped in a situation because you can't afford to leave it. What I didn't always share was the deeper lesson from my own experience, that financial independence, while crucial, was only part of the equation. Equally important was emotional independence, the clarity to recognize unhealthy dynamics, the courage to establish boundaries, the self-worth to walk away from relationships that diminished rather than enhanced your life. The following morning, I joined a small group tour of Tokyo's historical sites, enjoying the guide's expert knowledge and the easy camaraderie of fellow travelers. No one knew me as Emma Wilson, TechSphere executive, or Emma Wilson Daniels. Ex-wife. I was simply Emma, an American woman exploring Japan on her own, engaging with new experiences with open curiosity. This anonymity felt like yet another form of freedom, the ability to present myself without context or history, to be evaluated solely on present interactions rather than past roles or relationships. I wondered if Daniel had found similar liberation in Chicago, away from the whispers that had inevitably followed the collapse of both his marriage and his business in Portland. I hope he did, I realized with mild surprise. Not out of lingering affection, but from the perspective that everyone deserves the opportunity to grow beyond their mistakes, to redefine themselves after failure. The bitterness I'd once felt had dissolved, replaced by a philosophical acceptance that our marriage, for all its painful ending, had been a necessary chapter in both our stories. On my last evening in Tokyo, I sat in a small restaurant recommended by a local, savoring delicate, sashimi, and watching the chef's precise movements as he prepared each dish. The experience, the flavors, the presentation, the quiet appreciation of craftsmanship represented exactly the kind of moment Daniel would have rushed through, always more focused on appearances and status than genuine enjoyment. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Board approved. Expansion of your foundation program to 5 more cities. Congrats. I smiled, setting the phone aside to fully appreciate the final course being presented. The foundation's growth meant more women would gain the financial knowledge that had protected me during my own crisis. That legacy felt more meaningful than any corporate achievement or personal wealth accumulation. As I walked back to my hotel, through streets lined with cherry trees, petals drifting like snow in the gentle evening breeze, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had led me here. Daniel's betrayal, both financial and emotional, had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationship and my own complicity in maintaining destructive patterns. The double life I had created as protection had eventually become a cage of its own, limiting what I could express, experience, and embrace. Breaking free had required courage, strategic thinking, and a willingness to step into uncertainty. But the reward, this authentic life I now lived, had been worth every difficult moment, every painful revelation, every fear faced and overcome. The woman who had hidden her success to protect herself from a husband's financial recklessness no longer existed. The woman who walked alone beneath Tokyo's cherry blossoms was simply me, Emma Wilson, defined not by secrets or strategies or survival, but by the freedom to be exactly who I was, without apology or disguise. Up next, you've got 2 more stand out. Stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.